Rest assured, job interviews are never going to be the same after this. Around the world in 80 days. I've actually got a bit of a story when it comes to this one. Don't worry, it won't take too long. So, when I found this movie at a thrift store, I knew about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I was very curious to see what else got adapted into movies, where I found this gem. Around the World in 80 Days. And this was also at a time where I loved the long movies, so this was able to satisfy my craving. However, there was one major flaw with this particular copy. Tape 1. It's completely blank. I've run through it on fast forward, regular play, whatever. I put it in, all I get is a black screen. Nothing else. It just somehow got completely erased. I don't know how that happened. Since that day, I figured maybe I'll just find another copy at a thrift store somewhere. It never happened. However, my hope kind of came to light when I realized that this movie was made by Warner Brothers. And I'm like, Warner Brothers. HBO Max. HBO Max is Warner Brothers. It's gotta be on there. It's not. Why is it not on? Screw it, I'm just gonna buy a DVD of it. And that's exactly what I did. Now here's one of the things I rather like about the DVD, is that they kept the tradition of putting the movie on 2 separate discs. Usually it's like disc 1 for feature presentation and disc 2 for all the bonus material. But I'm happy to see you got part 1. This one ends with the intermission, and it starts right up again with part 2. Since I didn't want to neglect this original VHS copy I had, I watched part 2 on the tape, which actually worked just fine. I still don't understand how that happened. So like last time, I'm going to start with a basic summary of the book itself, and then compare that to the movie. So the movie takes place in 19th century England, which is why I'm wearing the bowler here. The main character we focus on is a very mysterious gentleman known as Phileas Fogg. I keep wanting to say frog every time I read that. He is a bit of a recluse who is just obsessed with being as punctual as possible. He belongs to a very exclusive club where only the elite of society can gather. But nobody can ever understand how he got in there. He didn't come from a very wealthy family, he's not heavily involved in the market, and he's not a great industrialist. So how he got in there is beyond anybody's guess. However, there was a recent daring heist on the Bank of England. There are rumors that this Phileas Fogg might have done it, but it's only just rumors. Nobody at the club thinks that he seriously did it. His daily routine is the same as it's always been for the past 20 years for him. He goes to the club at exactly 6 o'clock, reads today's paper, and then promptly goes home at 9:15. Because of this rather odd lifestyle, a servant of his has quit because he just can't handle anybody like Phileas Fogg. So he is promptly replaced by another manservant known as Passaportout. I have a feeling I'm butchering that because the guy is French and I don't know how to pronounce most of the vowels in French. They get along pretty well, as both are just as obsessed with being on time. As soon as Passaportout takes out his watch to see exactly what time it is, Phileas knew that they were going to hit it off just fine. From there, about a week or so passes before there's idle chit-chatting at the club about the idea of trying to go around the world in 80 days. To the shock of everybody, Phileas puts down the paper, turns over and says, "Sure, it could be done," and then starts giving a detailed itinerary of how such a journey could be done. A lot of people doubt that such a thing is possible, but Phileas puts his money where his mouth is and bets that he can do it. As opposed to leaving the club at 9:15, he leaves at 8 o'clock to hit the first ship on the leg of the journey. Obviously, the manservant is very shocked by this, but he is loyal to his master to the very end and just goes along for the ride. Their route takes them to India, Hong Kong, Japan, the United States, and then back to England once again. And then I also vaguely remember some part of them going into the Arctic. Maybe they took a shortcut through Canada or something, but it's a very fuzzy recollection of that particular scene. But the main reason I brought up those other sections is, for the most part, the book is all about go, go, go. Either that or really painting the picture of what all these exotic locations really look like. However, we start with India, where we have one of our major developments. So there is an express that has been told to cut right through the wilderness of India. However, there is a problem with the newspaper, and the railroad is only half complete, leaving Phileas Fogg and Passepartout to go through the jungle on top of an elephant, which they pay an exuberant amount of money for. But hey, Phileas is just a rich person, and he stands to make a lot of money if he can actually do this. While on the journey with the elephant, they spot a young woman who has been drugged and is about to be sacrificed to some sort of deity. I'm not going to give specifics. In the movie, they call the movement the Thuggies, which you may remember from Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom as well, and they want to sacrifice her to Colleen, which you'll also remember from that. I'm not sure if this is a made-up religion or not, so I'm not going to give the exact details. All you need to know is that Phileas is very sympathetic to this girl and has 2 extra days lined up for any delays that might come the way. He uses up both days to get her to safety, to which there's a little segment at the end that says, and Phileas was satisfied with this. From there, the next step is Hong Kong. Now what happens here is that Passepartout wants to go to a local bar. They have a few hours to kill until their next boat arrives to go to Japan. So at this bar, he comes up to what looks like a tobacco pipe, but it turns out to be a crack pipe. So after taking a few puffs of it, it's too much for his system, and he passes out. And this delays the company for several days. Luckily, they are able to get to the United States from Japan with a ship called the Uss Grant, obviously named after Ulysses S. Grant. From there, they take the railroad across the western part of the United States. They come across a bridge that is in horrible need of repair and probably can't stand the weight of the train. However, I guess it was common practice back then, but if you were to go over the bridge fast enough, it'd be less weight than if you were going over slowly enough. So basically, they just take the train, ramp it up to as fast as it can go, and they just barely make it across, just in time to see everything come crumbling down. Now, because of the delay in Hong Kong, the weather in the Midwest, unfortunately, is all covered over with snow. So they have a rather interesting mode of transportation. They call it a sledge. Basically, just imagine a sailboat, but it's on land. It's the weirdest thing, and quite frankly, I'm disappointed it wasn't shown in the movie. Well, sort of. We'll get to that. Because the land is so flat there, and because the winds are hostile, they can make some pretty good time on this sledge, where they make it to New York City. From there, they would have headed on a boat that would have headed back to England, and they would have been able to win the bet. However, all these rumors of the bank robbery start to catch up with Phileas Fogg. There is a warrant out for his arrest, as the robber bears a very striking similarity to Phileas Fogg. So, he's put in prison, and his record thrown out the window. The bet is completely gone. There is some hope, though. After a few days of confinement, the real bank robber was caught trying to escape the country. So he is acquitted, but not before losing horribly. He goes back to England, a defeated man with his manservant, Passepartout. However, Passapartout had to head out to get some groceries. And there he finds out that they actually gained a day because they went around the international date line. With this news, he goes back to his master, and they both make it to the club just in time to win the bet. And then, yeah, that's basically the end of the story, is they won. The main thing about the book is it's all about the locations, but it also just has this rush feel to it. It's just kind of like, go, go, go. Day 5, we made it. Day 25, we made it. Day 23, we lost 2 hours, but we can make it up if we do this, or if we just bribe the captain a little more. It's very energetic. That is the best word I can use to describe this. The opening of the movie is pretty much identical to the book, although the movie definitely shows its age at the very beginning. It was kind of a common practice at that time that if they wanted to introduce a character, they did it rather slowly. So, for example, when they introduced the character of Phileas Fogg, you see him walking into the club, but the camera is pretty much at the furthest table away from the door, and David Nevins, who I think is just a superb actor to play the role of Phileas Fogg, is just walking to the table. It just kind of kills the pace a little bit. But at the same time, I do like the idea of how they introduce the characters. From these slow sections, we can tell that Phileas is obsessed with being on time. He's part of the club. There's a bank robbery, and people wonder how he ever got into the club. The main difference here is instead of being a shut-in, he is a fantastic card player. While the punctuality's still there, he is just kind of fluttering around from table to table, seeing who will beat him at a game of whisk, I believe they call it. I've never heard of it, but maybe it's more of a UK thing. Now, they introduce Passapartout in a very clever way, I think. So there's a whole bunch of manservants being lined up to take the place of Phileas's last manservant, who is just fed up with his job and even tells the recruiter what the problem is. Passapartout is the only one there that has like a really worn out bowler, a suit that has been patched up so many times, and dirt all over his pants. But yet, he is the only one that is willing to accept this job. This is just a minor nitpick, but while in the book he is French, here in the movie he's Spanish. And on top of that, they added an interesting character quirk. He is obsessed with women. Basically, every time a beautiful girl walks by, he gets distracted and sometimes just kind of walks away. This leads to a little bit of conflict here and there. It's not distracting, but if you read the book, you might be a little confused. Phileas and Passapartout get to know each other. Phileas hammers in the idea that he's all about being punctual, while Passapartout, he is all too happy to follow his orders, but there isn't that connection that they have that both of them need to know exactly what time it is all the time. That night, Phileas goes to the club, and that's where they make the bet to go around the world in 80 days. Passapartout is obviously very shocked by this, because he knew exactly that his master wouldn't be back until 9:15, and he came back at about 8 o'clock this time. Phileas just tells him, pack up my clothes, we're going to take a lot of money, and we're going to go around the world in 80 days. And much like in the book, he just kind of rolls with it. Now, very early on in the journey, so Phileas is able to make it to France all right. However, he needs to ride the train in order to get to the east. Unfortunately, there is an avalanche that is blocking the train, and it's probably not going to be cleared away for several weeks. So, what does he do? He buys a hot air balloon. I don't remember this from the book, but hey, as it's so prominently displayed on both posters, I mean, it seems like he would have had to go in a balloon at some point in the journey. That's kind of another minor thing I love as well about the cover. So, they really make a big deal out of the balloon, sure, but I do like how if you look closely, you can see other modes of transportation going along the top of it, kind of showing all the various ways that Phileas went around the world. They do make it a little distance, however, they end up landing in Spain instead of in an area known as La Seine. I have a feeling I'm probably not pronouncing that right either. There is one way out. There is a particularly rich person visiting the town that has the fastest boat in the entire area. And here is where the movie starts to kind of drag a little bit. It's kind of a fun study in anthropology with Spain at that time, but I really didn't need to see all the dancing. It kind of kills the pace. I almost kind of feel Phileas's pain because the whole time I'm just like, come on, I know we can't go any faster, but can we do something about this? They're able to make contact with this rich man, and he's able to give his fast boat on one condition. Passepartout needs to enter in a bullfight, which will happen the next day. Once again, an anthropological study, but it does just kind of kill the pace a little bit. The rich man is satisfied, and they take the boat on to their next journey. We skip ahead to India. Now there's another bit of a difference here. So, since India was still owned by British at that point, there are several investigators out to get Fogg. The only problem is they need to wait for a warrant from England. One of the chief inspectors then follows Phileas in the hopes that the warrant can happen while he's still in India, or maybe even Hong Kong, because the British own that as well. So he's kind of a bit of a third wheel that kicks around a little bit. Just like in the book, the train ends abruptly, and they have to ride an elephant. Which these are two things I want to note before I forget. I'm not much of a cinematographer, but I think they did a really good job shooting this film. There are just kind of several scenes where you see characters just kind of staring out the window. They really sell all these exotic locations, almost making it feel like a bit of a travel movie. Just kind of like, hey, would you like to go here on your next vacation? Stuff like that. And also there's some fun little POV shots. For example, as they're riding the elephant through the jungle, they mount the camera as if it's another rider. And personally, I love it. It makes you feel like you're there even more. So as I mentioned already, the idea of the Indian girl about to be sacrificed is still kept in the movie. But they do change it up quite a fair bit. First off, she is a princess, which according to their religion, once the husband dies, the wife then must die as well. I don't claim to know everything about the Hindu faith, but I do know that generally you're supposed to cremate the body, and in this case they would cremate her along with them. Instead of taking 2 days to make a daring escape, it only takes that night actually. Passepartout comes out with a brilliant plan. Basically, he takes the place of the dead husband, then rises from the funeral pyre, and everybody just runs spooked because they angered an evil spirit. Ooh, maybe a little culturally insensitive, I'm not entirely sure. Now, unlike the book, where the princess was kept in India, she actually rides along with them to Hong Kong. She has a uncle there that might be able to take care of her. That is the next spot to mention. There's a really good joke here that I love. So, they find out that the princess's uncle owns a shop in town. They wonder why all the doors are locked and all the windows are shut. They find a local person, and Phileas, not knowing Chinese, attempts to break it down to the man, basically saying, "Is boss man here?" To which I love his reaction. He just speaks in perfect English saying, "Afraid not, sir. He's had a horrible run-in with the law and he had to flee the country in a hurry." If you were to see this scene, it would be a lot funnier than how I'm describing it, because I don't know the exact lines. I don't have that good of a memory, are you kidding me? With this revelation, the princess stays with him for the whole rest of the journey. Now, I was very happy to see that they kept the idea of Passepartout overdosing in this version. But what's different is that the inspector does it. And instead of being a crack pipe, which that would have probably been a little too much for 1956 standards, they sell it as the idea that it is a very powerful alcoholic beverage. I love how they introduce it. There's just a random guy in the background that takes a shot of it and then immediately passes out. The inspector gives this mysterious drink to Passepartout out. He figures if he can keep him in the country for 2 days, a warrant should be ready to take Phileas Fogg in. Passepartout is very annoyed by this and basically says he's not going to betray his master in any way whatsoever. But he keeps insisting on the drink, to which he does, and he passes out. Now, I kind of thought they were going to go for one of those, what they call Shanghai references. The idea that they pass him out and then they're going on a boat fighting some war that they didn't want. But Passepartout had to buy the tickets, which were found to be in his jacket when he passed out. When he comes on board the ship that was meant to head to Japan without Phileas. And it's also fun to note that Peter Lorre has a small cameo in this section, which I feel kind of connects it a little bit to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Unfortunately, James Mason isn't in this movie, which would have just been hilarious if he was. I mean, even just a small little bit part would have been fantastic. But anyway, Phileas tries a desperate search to figure out where Passepartout is, but the local authorities say that he is in Japan by now. So Phileas, being undeterred, is gonna go to Japan and collect him there. What he does is he rents I want to say they call it a junk. It's a particular type of ship. Well, it's not professional. They were able to get to Japan that way. Now, in Japan, Passepartout doesn't have any money. He left it with Phileas. So, he has to figure out how to be able to get a job. At the beginning of the movie, he is introduced as a jack of all trades. Once again, very deviant from the book. As in the book, he only knew buttling, while here he knows a little bit of everything. And one of his skills is he's an acrobat. So he joins a Japanese circus. So Phileas spends a day or two looking around Japan for his long-lost friend, when he comes to the conclusion that perhaps he's back to being an acrobat again. And that is where he finds him. Being reunited again, they all go aboard the Uss Grant and head for the United States. And that is where part 1 ends. After an intermission, which I'm still kind of amazed to hear that Infinity Wars didn't have an intermission in it. I kind of thought it was a general rule that if the movie was over 3 hours, there had to be a break somewhere in the middle, but I guess not. But with that out of the way, they go to the United States. And just like in Spain, it drags here a little bit because they really want to sell the atmosphere of it. Once again, it's an anthropology study, but I feel like it just kind of kills the pace a little bit. While in town waiting for the train to start, there is this one rather rough gentleman who insults the princess's honor, to which Phileas isn't having any of it. And the other odd thing as well is that the train is the fastest way to get across the country. However, it is very prone to attack by the Native Americans. I would say Indians like they do in this movie, but that just seems kind of insensitive. So Passepartout is instructed to buy all manner of firearms. He looks just like one of those Mexican banditos. He's got like 2 giant belts across his chest, 3 guns, a giant hat, and well, a little bit of his Spanish mustache kind of really sells him as looking part of Pancho Villa's gang. On the train, we have the very famous scene of the train jumping the bridge. And it pretty much plays out exactly like it does in the novel. But the thing I love is there's a little bit of dramatic irony here. Passepartout goes outside as soon as the train stops to see what is up, and he knows full well that they're gonna gun it and hope the bridge doesn't collapse underneath. So while Phileas is playing whisk with the investigator as well as the Indian princess, he's perfectly calm, while Passepartout is just like, okay, I hope we're gonna make it. Very nerve-wracking. Just like the novel, they make it to the end, right before the bridge collapses, to which Passapartout is like, whew. Another little bit of dramatic irony as well is one of the other people that got out of the train to see what was up was this rather rough gentleman that assaulted the princess. As the journey goes on, he bumps into Phileas, and there he wants a clean fight. Phileas accepts, but doing it the only way that a true British gentleman would know. A duel on the train. And I just love the idea that they clear out the car for them and the conductor says, try not to miss. This wood paneling is very expensive. I'm just kind of like, you don't care that your passengers are going to attempt to kill each other? Anyway, they are about to aim to take their shots when all of a sudden the Native Americans attack the train. And this part I find rather hilarious because this is something that happens all the time. Everybody on the train, and I do mean everyone on the train, even the princess, even the kids, are given some sort of firearm in order to fend off these natives as the train keeps going. It's just nuts. During this part, the train all of a sudden speeds up, to which Phileas and Passapartout come to the conclusion that the engineer must have been taken hostage. Passapartout, being the brave soul, goes along the top of the train, dodging arrows as well as just everything else that the natives are throwing at him. And he's able to make it to the train. The engineer is able to fend off his captors and thus applies the brake just in time for the cavalry to take care of the rest. However, in the sudden stop, Passapartout is flung from the train and the natives capture him, only to tie him up to a pole and then later try to burn him for real this time, just like the people in India. I wonder if there's a bit of a theme going on here. Phileas hears about this fate and decides to go back to get him. Everybody on the train says we can't hold it for you, and the next train's not going to be for 3 days. However, Phileas owes a lot to his friend, and he's not going to give up. Luckily, the cavalry is still there, and Phileas leads the charge to the camp, and they are able to rescue Passapartout just in time. Waiting for the next 3 days isn't a prospect that Phileas is happy about. So what he does is he creates a rather odd mode of transportation. He finds an old hand car just kind of lying on the side, puts it on the track, and then attaches a giant sheet to it to almost, and I mean almost, make the sledge as it's described in the movie. Now there's a bit of a picture here of this mode of transportation right there. The winds are able to carry it, and the track is able to keep him moving forward. Just like in the book, Phileas misses the boat to get back to England and secure his victory. Instead, he goes to Venezuela. I don't really understand why Venezuela, but I'm gonna guess there was some sort of boat that was gonna go to England like that day or something. I really have no idea. But we get a rather fun scene here. So, it's a coal-burning ship, but unfortunately, the ship completely runs out of coal. This will not do for Phileas at all. So what he does is he offers to buy the ship from the captain, to which he keeps saying, oh, well, this is like antique hardwood. There's so many things, it's kind of expensive. To which Phileas just takes the remainder of his fortune that he brought for this expedition and gives it to him to buy the boat. Basically, now that he's the new owner, their directive has been given to burn anything and everything that will burn, just to make sure that the motor keeps running and that they make it there right on time. Seems like it's not really going to work, though. They're a small distance out when they literally run out of everything to burn. In one last effort, Phileas takes off his top hat, I don't have a top hat, and throws it into the fire for one last burst of energy. But everybody's faith is restored when somebody calls out, "Land ho!" And they just barely make it. Now, I still love the idea that once the ship makes it in the port, Phileas says, "Oh yeah, you're the owner again. You can do whatever you want." Basically, all that's left is the helm, which is the steering wheel, the engine, and the basic deck. Couldn't he have at least gotten some of his money back? I mean, it's hard to say how many thousands of pounds that he paid for this ship. And that kind of leads to a small plot hole for me. He literally gave every single dollar he had because he put it all in this giant bag. But yet he is still able to buy a ticket to get back to the United Kingdom. This maybe he just had like a few stuffed in his jacket somewhere. I don't know. But in Venezuela, that is where Phileas is detained, just like in the book. The inspector finally catches up with him, finally has a warrant, and arrests him. He's held in jail for, thankfully, only about 8 hours or so, and is set free. However, this setback is enough to throw Phileas Fogg off the record. To which he returns back to England, just like in the book, just depressed that he lost the bet. But now he also has no money, as he took his entire fortune to fund this expedition. However, there is a little bit of a silver lining here. He still has the Indian princess, to which he's developed a little bit of a liking for her along the way, and they decide to get married. They got like nothing else going on, so they figure, let's go for it. Passapartout is sent out immediately to find a priest, to which that is where he makes the shocking discovery that it is Saturday. They still have a few hours to make it back to the club and still win the bet. Passapartout runs home and tells Phileas this right away. He attempts to take a horse and buggy, but unfortunately that, well, let's just say it breaks down. The real reason is very stupid, and so he decides to just run there on foot, and is nearly stopped by a group of born-again Christians. He makes it just in time, and I mean like to the second, back to the club, and he wins the bet. Just then, he turns around and sees the Indian princess standing there, to which everybody stares in horror. Phileas says, "You must leave now. A woman has never entered this club before." To which she says, "Why?" Which Phileas just goes, "Well, it'd be the end of the British Empire." Just then, one of the servants of the club comes by and sees the woman, and is so shocked by her presence, he drops the tray he's carrying, which then makes a mess of the club. The camera then pans onto one of the members, to which he just stares at the camera and goes, "This is the end." And it actually is. Well, I feel like this would have been a fantastic way to end a Pink Panther movie. I just don't think that is an ending that does a long, epic journey like this justice. I know if I was in charge, is that after the club was wrecked, you would just hear wedding bells off in the corner. The camera would fade in onto the happy couple kissing, and then the camera would pan into the audience, to which all of them are saying, "I knew I shouldn't have made that bet." Phileas is the most prompt person there is. Of course he would have been able to go around the world in 80 days. And then maybe one of them would just kind of look into the camera and say, "Yep, he did." And then end the movie. I will admit, that is probably one of the problems with long epic stories in general is, how do you end it? That is definitely something I feel is a problem here. But I guess it's a lot more closure than in the book, where he basically just makes it back to the club and the end. At least there's a little bit of banter here and there. But the way the movie is set up, I feel like we needed just a little bit more closure. So that is Around the World in 80 Days. So it's almost a little bittersweet that it ends here. But there is one rather fun thing to note. This movie has a bit of an introduction. This is not too odd if you've seen the Ten Commandments, but there was more about how they made the story, while here was more about how Jules Verne's predictions were actually pretty accurate. Even at the time this movie came out in 1956, it was definitely possible to go around the world in 80 days. There are submarines that existed, and even have the capability to go to the moon. And what's even crazier is that they really focus on this part. And there they show what the moon would have probably looked like in an early film from the 1920s. I feel like a lot of people have seen this film. It's only about like 10 minutes long. I think most people will know it most for basically the moon has a face and like the rocket is just a giant bullet which just gets wedged into its eyeball. If you don't know what I'm talking about with that description, I'm gonna guess it's probably not that hard to find. I'm pretty sure it's public domain. Just how the intro ends is very abrupt, basically saying the idea that the world was shrinking, even back in the 19th century. And then the movie just begins. Much like all the other ones, I highly recommend it. Although I will admit, the longer length would probably turn off a lot of people, and the potential racial insensitivities, if there are any, might be an other deal breaker. And I have a feeling that's probably why I had to buy it on DVD rather than to watch it on HBO Max. But if these aren't deal breakers for you, you'll find a rather fun and unique adventure. While I'm here, I figure I might as well rank the movies as well as the books by my personal preference. We'll start with the movies first. At the bottom we have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's not that it's a bad movie, it's just I wanted something a little closer to the book. From there, I would definitely pick Around the World in 80 Days. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with this. The exotic locations, the characters, the cinematography, everything about this movie is just fantastic. But I just enjoyed Journey to the Center of the Earth just a little bit more. In terms of the books, I would have to put Journey to the Center of the Earth at the bottom. It's a good book, but not really a whole lot happens in it. It's just kind of a lot of walking and a lot of beautiful atmosphere. It's not bad, but I just feel like there were better stories. There I'd put 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Probably the only one I have read multiple times. But I probably should note that the first time was the unabridged version, and every other version after that were the abridged versions. I just don't really have the time for that, and, well, I just want to know the basic story. And then from there, I think the best one is Around the World in 80 Days. Much like the movie, there's just this tense energy that I love about it. So that's all I've got for Jules Verne movies. Maybe if I read more books, I'll find more adaptations along the way. In the future, I might do more. I have 2 more possibilities for comparisons that I want to do. The first I have is Peter Pan. Now, there's been so many iterations of this story that I would just be comparing it to the Disney version, but I gotta read it first. I don't think that'll take too long, though. It seems pretty small. This next one I have right here is a bit odd. I could probably almost do a review of it right now, but I want to read it one more time just to be sure I've got the details right. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Now you might be wondering, why would I be interested in a children's book? I mean, it has like pictures in it. This is a little below your intelligence level, isn't it? But take a look at the author. Does that name sound familiar to you? It should. He wrote the James Bond novels. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the idea that Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, a character all about sex and violence, made a children's book. But what's even more fascinating is that the movie itself does have a little bit of that Bond DNA in it. After all, it is made by the same production crew, and hey, Desmond Llewellyn is even briefly in this movie as well. But one thing I can tell you right now, and I'll end with this as like a little bit of a teaser, the book is so much better. Until next time, keep having fun.